As in photography, one of the most critical aspects of working with 3D is lighting. You've got to remember, you're in 3 dimensions, so you're in a 3-dimensional space, so you need to light things in 3 dimensions as well. It's not the same as doing a lighting effect on a 2-dimensional image. Again, it requires a different set of thinking or a different thought process when it comes to this sort of thing. So I'm just, over the next couple videos, just going to kind of cover some basics regarding lighting here, especially in Photoshop. It's not as complicated as it seems, but there is a bit of a learning curve into it, in that it takes some getting used to with things like moving lights around and getting used to where they are in 3D space. But in here, in Photoshop CS6, they have added a few little visual aids to help you determine where your lights are and how to go about moving them around. So just to give you an idea, I've got a image or a file created here with a gray background. This is going to best demonstrate so you can see the wireframes and such. And I've got a text layer here created. I'm going to go ahead and just fill this text with white and just go ahead and convert this text layer into a 3D object. So I'm just going to go under the 3D menu to new 3D extrusion from selected layer. Again, you can do the same thing inside the 3D panel as well. So now I've got my text, it's created, it's gone ahead and showing me the ground plane and everything like that. So if I go and grab my 3D rotate 3D object tool and make sure that I have current view selected in my 3D panel, I can move this around and I can see that there is a light source because it is indeed casting a shadow on my ground plane. So there is one light source in here, and the reason I know that, aside from the obvious shadows, is there's this small widget right here, and that is the light itself. So if you click on that, it will actually activate the light, and then you'll see this kind of orb in the middle of the screen with a little stick on it. And that is indicating the light source. And right now, when we go over here in our 3D panel, and go over here to the 4th tab over in the 3D panel here at the very top, the light section, and we can just isolate it to where we just see the lights. It also shows up here in this master list down here at the very bottom. You see infinite light. However, I just want to work with the lights, so we'll just go and filter them by just the lights here. So by default, when I created this text, it added an infinite light. So to change the appearance of that light, you just make sure that you have the light selected, or click on the small widget here and just click and drag around, and you'll move around the light source, and you'll notice that in real time the shadow changes with the positioning of the light. So I'm just clicking and dragging around. You can see the wireframe or the little globe in the middle. And where this line is in a small dot, you can consider this the actual light source. And this bigger orb here shows you how the light is hitting the object. And you can see it corresponds on my text there. Now, here's a kind of a cool thing they added in CS6. If you are trying to just get the shadow position right, and you find that moving the light around can be a little frustrating to do that, here's a cool trick. If you hold down the Shift key, you can actually click directly on the shadow and move it around, and the light will correspond with it. So if I know I want the shadow over here, I can move it over there. So I'm getting better control because now I'm controlling the shadow instead of the light. Now, of course, the light is moving in relation to that, but it's the difference between moving the light around, which is if I release my Shift key, now I'm moving the light just like that. And if I hold the Shift key down and click directly on the shadow, now I'm moving the shadow around. So I have 2 ways of controlling the light source there on my object. All right, so let's go back and let's just kind of bring our view down here a little bit. So in the lights, as I said, it created an infinite light by default on my object. Now, just like any other feature, when you have it selected here in the 3D panel, the corresponding properties show up here in the Properties panel. So let's just kind of break down what we've got here. We've got a preset menu. You can actually add a number of different presets. These are built into Photoshop. You just go ahead and select them, and it will go ahead and apply that lighting scenario to your object and update it as you see right there. Now, you can also save your own lighting scenarios. If you generate a lighting scenario, you've got different colored lights and things going on, you like that lighting setup, you can, of course, save your own preset just by choosing Save down here. So let's go back a couple to our original lighting there. There we go. So you have preset lights. Just below that, you can choose what type of light you want this to be. There are 3 different types. Actually, there's 4 different types. There's the point light. spotlight, and infinite light. And there's also something called an image-based light, which we're going to talk about in the next video. But for now, let's just concentrate on these three. So, as I said, you have the infinite light, which is created by default. And this is really meant to kind of be like sunlight. It's really coming from one direction. It's kind of ambient, but definitely coming from one direction. And you can move it around and get that kind of daylight feel about it. So that is the default light. The next one is spotlight. And you can change your existing light just by going in this menu and then changing it like that. And now we have a spotlight. So now, question is, where is the spotlight? Well, I see this widget right here, which is telling me that the spotlight is somewhere off this way, off view. But here's a cool trick. In that same properties panel, down here at the very bottom, we've got two buttons here. One for point at origin, and then one for move to view. Now, the first one, point to origin, if I click on it, it's going to force whatever light I have selected to point directly at my subject. So if it's facing away in any direction, it's actually going to make the light face the orange or the object itself. The next one, I like this one. This is a move to view. So if the light is kind of just resting anywhere, what you can do is actually, if I like where I'm positioned right here, and I want the light to be right here where I'm looking at it, just click on this move to view, and now the light appears right at your angle of view, casting a light on the object. I also like to do this if the light is hiding off camera and I don't want to drag around and look for it. Just click that move to view button and it will bring the light into view. And what you can do now is, again, make sure you have the move tool selected. Go up here in your 3D or the options panel and use any of these 3D tools to move around the light. Now, if I just take the slide tool here, I'll push it toward the text itself. I can take this and just slide it up. And like I said, this kind of takes practice with working with lights because it's a little bit different than moving around 3D objects, because the lights, you go in one direction and you'll see the light starts to go in the other direction. So it kind of takes a little bit of getting used to with that. But once you've mastered it, you'll start to see a lot of different cool possibilities with all these lights here inside of Photoshop. So that is the spotlight. And then you have, of course, a point light, which is kind of like a light bulb. It's really just putting light in all directions. And let's go ahead and move that to view. And you get to see it's a small little wireframe. And as I move it around, let's just move it closer to the text. So you can see it's just like a little orb of light that just kind of can be positioned anywhere, and it just casts light on your subject. So there's the three different types of basic lights. You have point, spot, and infinite. And you can add multiple lights. Now, of course, by default, this one has... Let's go back and make that an infinite light right there. But I could go ahead and add a new light. If I go down here to the bottom of the panel, I can choose a new spotlight. Oh, no, that did another infinite light. Let's actually do a new spotlight. So I can have multiple lights doing different things, both at different intensities and such like that, to illuminate my objects. And to modify them, to tweak them a little bit, you can go in here in the Properties panel, and after you've selected the type of light you want, you have other options. Well, I can go in here and actually change the color of the light. If I click on that color swatch and I want to make this a green light, it'll cast on my object. I can raise the intensity and make it super bright, or drop the intensity, making it a little less intense there. Something like that. I can determine whether or not I want it to cast a shadow on the ground plane or on another object if it's doing that. I can even increase the softness of the shadow. Softness is kind of cool because it gives you a little bit more realism to the shadow. Here, hang on a sec. Let me reposition my infinite light here. And just kind of bring the shadow to the front here. There we go. So just so you can see, there is the shadow. It's being cast toward us. If I raise the softness of it to, say, 10, you can see it kind of gets scattered. But if I do a render, there I'm getting nice soft shadows that'll look a little bit more realistic than the hard edge shadows it gives me by default. So you can see it's doing a little bit more rendering here. And if I go ahead and turn on my spotlight, so it illuminates the front, and then I go ahead and tell it not to do any shadowing here. Let's go ahead and say, oh, not that one. Let's turn off the shadow on my spotlight. So you can determine if you want a light to cast shadows on an object, whether or you just want it to illuminate the subject. Written this way, in this case, I would want the shadow in the front, so I can turn the shadow off there. And you can increase or decrease the hot spots. When you have a spotlight like this, you can increase the cone size, but widening the scope of the light. And you can even set it off to have light fall off if you want it to be a little bit more realistic and closing in the light. See if I close this in here. So you can kind of focus the light a little bit more by using that light fall off, and you can determine the inner and outer area, see like that, of how much fall off you want it to have, whether you want it to be really harsh or just kind of gradually fall off. So you have all those options with your lights. And again, these can be combined with different objects and different things like that to create multiple different types of lighting scenarios. So you can see, very much like reality, you can position your lights. You can have a key light in front. You can have side lights doing different things like that. So if you're a photographer, you're familiar with lighting setups. It's almost the same thing, but here in a virtual space. And not just with subjects or real-life people, but with graphics and other elements. You can do all kinds of things just with lighting. And I'm going to have some tutorials coming up in the next few months on cool tricks you can do with just lighting effects using 3D. Now, let's jump into the next video. I want to talk a little bit more about lights with a more involved logo, and talk about the other light that we hadn't get a chance to talk about yet, and that is image-based lights.